And here's the thing. Now I get paid money to go and talk to major corporations about how to get the best out of their people. And what that makes me appreciate is just how extraordinary you are and what an amazing art form teaching is. Because we're a profession, don't you think, who undersell ourselves all the time. Society sometimes doesn't help us. But as teachers, we often don't think we're up here. Yet the truth is, the best teachers I know would make the greatest leaders in any organisation because they understand the humanity behind what it means to get the best out of somebody else. I had a fascinating lunch a few months ago, so I'm a very lucky boy. I had a fascinating lunch a few months ago with one of the great business leaders of our time, a man called Eric Schmidt, who is the chief executive of Google. So he is a powerful guy. And at lunch, I was asking him about his views on education, and specifically, I wanted to know his opinion, because you hear rumours all the time around the world. I wanted to ask his opinion on whether he thought technology would ever replace the teacher. And I thought if anyone was going to have a view on this, it would be Eric Schmidt. And you know, he didn't even need to think about his answer. It was immediate. He said to me, no. Because education at its heart will always rely on a series of human interactions. Humanity will always be at the very core of great education. Yes, technology can enhance and support education. It can open education up to areas of the world that maybe it hasn't been before. It can help to revolutionise education. But at its heart, education will always be about human interaction. And I was really heartened by that. So yes, education is without doubt an art form. We are artists, and great artists are always looking to develop, to change, to move forward, to experience new things, to be cognizant and understanding of the world, to understand the emotions of the people that we are privileged enough to work with. And the second point I want to make before I start, you're probably thinking, he's already started. How long is this introduction going to be? Oh, we could go on all day, trust me. The second point is about the English language. You know, because one of the things about the Brits, as I'm sure many of you know, and by the way, it strikes me that being a British man in Mexico is a dangerous thing to be. Because most of the British men that I know that now live here because they fell in love with a Mexican woman. Thank you for that, Dan. All I'm saying is, I'm taken, ladies, okay? Tell my wife that, will you? But one of the things about the English, is we tend to, sometimes we do ourselves down, I think. British people, have you noticed, can be pretty miserable sometimes. We can, can't we? We tend to be glass half empty kind of people. And I was to an extent. I'm awful, I can't admit this, well, I'm glad the ambassador's gone, but you know, there were times when I've travelled around the world where I used to find myself feeling embarrassed to be British. And actually I did. And one of the reasons, apart from having a lousy soccer team, by the way, and I know Mexico share my pain, I think I got away with that one, just. Part of my shame is that I don't speak any other language. If any of you follow me on Twitter and you go, yes you do, no I don't, that's Google Translate for you. It's a marvellous thing. Just don't rely on it to say anything important. But the thing incredibly, the more you travel, the more you realise how vital it is. And it really hit me in 2006 when I made my first visit to Shanghai in China. And I got the chance, actually thanks to the British Council. As a school principal in the UK in those days, there were programmes which allowed school head teachers to go and visit other countries and explore education practice. So I got the opportunity to visit Shanghai with a group of colleagues. And one of the things I found extraordinary, given China's status in the world today and its explosive nature as a major economic force, was that one of the 4 subjects on the Chinese core curriculum is English. It's ranked equal to the teaching of their own language. And more extraordinarily than that, is the Chinese know that English is the language of global business to such an extent that they realise that as young people grow into adults and work in the global business environment, sometimes their Chinese names can be quite confusing and difficult to pronounce. So the first thing children do when they start school in China is they pick for themselves English names. Did you know that? Every Chinese child chooses an English name, which they'll use for the rest of their lives, and particularly when they're communicating on a global level. Now, I have to say that's quite dangerous, asking young children to choose English names. Because when I was there, every boy called himself David Beckham. Hello, my name's David Beckham. And who are you? I'm David Beckham too. Extraordinary, really. But there you go. So I'm absolutely thrilled to be here. But let's start at this point. One of the things we need to be aware of as we go through the next 2 days, one of the things that concerns me most about the global education debate is I think we've overcomplicated education. I think we are so desperate to find the silver bullet, the magic answer to the global education challenge. Have you noticed this? Governments all over the world look at other countries and they go, tell us what to do. We'll do that. And then the international education league tables get published, and we all go to whoever's top of the international league tables, and we go, we must do what you do. And new initiatives are coming along all of the time. Think about digital technologies, which, by the way, don't get me wrong, I think digital technology is exciting. But somehow, again, we've just grabbed this technology and assumed that by itself, technology was going to transform the education system. It doesn't. And one of the things that worries me as I travel around the world these days is to see the number of teachers who feel confused, a little bit scared, sometimes undermined, because they actually don't think they know enough about what they need to do, because they're not aware of all the new great initiatives and all the new great ideas. A lot of the teachers I meet feel quite scared that they don't seem to know as much as everybody else seems to know. And I want to bring you back to what I think you must do over the next 2 days. And that, above all things, I want you to think about trusting yourselves. Because one of the things I know about great teachers, as I said at the start, is that it's in here and in here. And I think too many teachers have stopped trusting their own instincts, their own natural abilities. And what I want you to do is not just to be swept away by the wonderful things you see over the next 2 days, but to ask your own instincts how that may be of value to you, whether it might be of value to your students. You see, one of the great challenges in the global race in education today is that we all feel we're in competition with each other. And despite all the changes and the new ideas and the new thinking over the last 20 or 30 years, I have to question genuinely how much has really changed about the way we educate. Because I'm not sure it has. Because it strikes me that most of the policies and systems that have been put in place in our schools have been done so under the mistaken belief that if something isn't working, it's because we're not trying hard enough. Think about the way we're told to work with our students. If they're not picking up what they need to quickly enough, we tell them it's because they're not working hard enough. If we as teachers don't seem to be delivering on the results, we're made to believe that it's because we're not working hard enough. So policies come along that push us all to work harder. It's a very traditional industrial mindset. Let me give you the best visual example I can. I wonder how many of you have seen this. This is a set of slides, pictures I discovered that just make me laugh. So there's nothing serious here, but you'll see what I mean. This is a small fishing village in northern Scotland. And you will notice that there is a man stood on what used to be a van. Can you all see that down here? There it is. Now the women in the audience are all going, well, it would be a man. Men are rubbish drivers. It might have something to do, although I'm not prepared to be sure, with the fact that there is a bar just over here. Now this man has clearly made a mistake. And what's really wonderful is this group of men here have left the bar to come and help him. Now I know I'm on a winner looking around the room because the majority of the room are women here today. Brilliant. And have you noticed how whenever there's a physical problem, men seem to think it's their responsibility? If it's physical, men think it's their domain. So they step forward. Have you noticed that? Leave this to us, little lady. We are men. We are hunters. We shall sort this for you. And then you may celebrate our genius. So these men have gathered, they've come out of the bar, and they've assumed man problem-solving position. Now, very luckily for these men, because it's a fishing village, there's a crane. And they've decided, these men, that the answer is to lift the van out of the water using the crane. And look, it's going brilliantly. So brilliantly that even more men have come out of the bar to claim their own genius. Nothing attracts men to other men more than success. So now there's lots of men, and if you look carefully, they have moved from problem-solving position to problem-solved position. And they're now ready to go back and celebrate their genius in the bar until this happens. Now, what I need you to notice about this picture is that all the men have run away. Even the little dog over here, who is a boy dog, is now running in the opposite direction. But here's the problem, fundamentally, with traditional education and the way we've managed it. It's taught us all something which is fundamentally wrong. What it's taught us is, if we make a mistake or fail, it's because we're not working hard enough. We didn't try hard enough. So what these men then decide to do is they decide the problem here is that the crane wasn't big enough. So they go and get themselves a bigger crane. And you'll notice that all the men have come back again. Ah, yes, I think you'll find what we needed was a bigger crane. There it is. I don't even need to show you the last slide, do I? joys of this event today and tomorrow. You have time over the next 2 days, precious time, to think, to reflect, to talk to each other. And I don't want to hear anybody say to anybody else about how hard they're working. I want you to share ideas. I want you to share the things that you're doing differently. I want you to celebrate your successes. I want you to talk to one another, to reflect, and to challenge each other. To actually say, not how do we work harder, but how can we work differently. You see, going back to Eric Schmidt, something else he said to me which I found fascinating was the story of Google. He said, you know, when I took over Google, he said it was the most amazing experience. It was the most amazing experience because what we were doing was new. So we were a group of people who had nothing to be accountable for. We just had ideas. And we were a brilliant group of people. So we made new things happen. And it was exciting. And he said the greatest challenge for us was this. We became successful. He said the problem for Google was the minute you become successful, you have something to lose. And when you have something to lose, the pressure builds. And Google has always been at its best, he said, when we've created stuff from our own passion, our own beliefs, our own vision. The problem was, the more the pressure mounted on us, and other people started to compete with us, we started to obsess with what they were doing. So we kept looking at what other companies were doing and going, oh, they're doing that, we need to do that. And so suddenly we'd run in that direction. And then somebody would go, and did you know that Apple are doing this? So then we'd run in that direction. He said the greatest disasters Google have ever made have been when we tried to copy what somebody else is doing. He said, my great challenge as Executive Chief Officer of Google is to make sure that we focus on what we know is right, on our vision, on the things that we want to achieve. And so again, one of the great benefits for me of this event is the fact that you can have those conversations. What is it? Well, they're coming to take me away. What is it that you believe in? How are you going to improve what you believe in, what you do, what you're passionate about? Rather than just copying all the time what other people are doing. The minute you do that, you're going to water down what's in here. It's no longer an art form at that point. You're then running a marathon. And the two things are very, very different. So trust yourselves more. Make sure you're in touch with your instincts. Share, collaborate, challenge one another. But be sure that what you do is remember that you're world class. And that in order to maintain that status as world class, you have to drive your own ambitions, your own vision, and your own thinking. I'd like to share with you, if I can, my own personal vision for education. Just to see if it matches in some way what yours might be. So for over 20 years that I've been privileged enough to teach, inside here I think I've always believed in these things. But it's only over time I've started to truly understand them. And I think for me, education can be defined through 3 words. Firstly, that I believe the greatest privilege of an educator is to help the students we work with understand their own individual potential. To help them develop their own ambitions, their own dreams, their own possibilities. Whatever their socio-economic place in the world, wherever they're born, whatever neighbourhood or wherever their geography, our job is to help each individual young person find their own aspiration and value in the world. My fear is I don't know that it feels that way sometimes to our students. You know, if we're honest with ourselves, we all know teachers who, for one reason or another, don't focus on those things. There is an incredibly provocative quote that I read for the first time at the turn of the millennium. It came from a book written by two professors of education, Catherine Burke and Ian Grosvenor, and it comes from a book called The School I'd Like. It's a wonderful book. Unfortunately, I don't think it's in print anymore. But it was a book that basically was filled with quotes from young people between the ages of 3 and 18. And it was asking them, they were responding to the one question: what would your ideal school be like? And the book is filled with laughter, inspiration, challenge, because you know how honest young people can be, right? They're pretty scary if you ask them for an opinion, because they'll tell you, and sometimes it hurts. And there's a quote in this book that when I read it for the first time, it was like somebody had punched me right here in my gut. Because it was one of the most powerful and provocative things I think I've ever heard anybody say about education. And it came from a young woman who, when she was interviewed, was 16 years old. Her name was Kirsty. And she was in the UK in a really tough, challenging area of social deprivation. So this wasn't a child from a middle-class, comfortable family. And she was asked the question, what would your ideal school be like? And her answer was this: in my ideal school, we will no longer be treated like a herd of an identical wild animal, waiting to be civilized for the outside world. You will realize and respect that it's my world too. Which brings me to my first point, really, about the art of great teaching. Great teachers do not control their students. Great teachers empower their students. I think this is a really important challenge. Because if the only way we can control our students is by threatening them, that's not an art form. Any adult can walk into any room of young people and scare them into doing what they want them to do. The art of a great teacher is to make students believe that they have the control, they have the power, they have the opportunity, and that we as teachers act as facilitators. The second word is learning. Now, nobody would argue that learning is by far the most important gift that any civilized society can bestow on its young people. But again, one of the worries I have about the complexity of the education system is that it is always focused on outcomes. Have you noticed this? So when we talk to our students, we tell them that they have to work hard because one day it might be important. Now, to a lot of young people, that's irrelevant, because they're living their lives for now, not for one day. There's an amazing story again I heard many years ago that was about the great and progressive American educator, John Holt, who, when he was coming towards his retirement, like all of us in this room, this is a curse of teachers. I wonder how many of you have got a list of all the things you've wanted to do in your lives but have never had the time, because we're so busy being teachers. I don't even have time to drink a bottle of wine. And we all have these lists, don't we, of all the things we're going to do when we retire. And John Holt had one of these lists, and at the top of his list, his wife knew that at the top of his list was a profound regret that he'd never learned to play a musical instrument. And the musical instrument he'd always desperately wanted to play was the cello. And his wife knew this. So as a special gift as he reached retirement, she arranged for him to have some cello lessons. And he started going along to his cello lessons, and he loved it, learning to play the cello. And after a few months, his music teacher and him sat down for a cup of tea. And they talked about his progress, and the music teacher did quite a lot of talking. And at the end of her talking, she turned round to John and she said, "Have you got anything you'd like to ask me?" And John had waited his moment, smiling, drinking in everything she was saying. And he said, "I have just one question." He said, "For months now, I've been telling my friends that I'm learning to play the cello." He said, "When can I tell my friends I'm playing the cello?" You know, that particularly strikes me about learning a language. Because I think sometimes we keep telling our students that they're learning to speak a language. You are learning to speak a language. And that's quite abstract for children, don't you think? Because they must go home after a few days and go, when am I allowed to say that I speak the language? At what point am I now speaking a language? And again, I think what we have to be very careful of in our classrooms is that our lessons don't always feel like we're teaching our children to speak English one day. That actually what we're doing is immersing them in the moment. Because learning is always at its most powerful when students feel they're living it now, not when they're just building it up, because one day it might be important to them. You know, it strikes me that in some classrooms around the world, education for children is a bit like the Catholic version of purgatory. It's like something you have to go through before you come out the other side. How many of us have said to our own children, "I know you don't like it, darling. I didn't like it either. But we have to go through it." Like somehow it's a rite of passage. If you think about it, it's not a particularly good sales pitch, is it? You wouldn't get children buying something because they know it's going to be rubbish, but one day it'll be okay, trust us. If PlayStation had turned round when they first launched and said, "Actually, using a PlayStation, you're not going to enjoy it very much, but trust us, in a few years' time, you'll find it interesting," not many kids would buy. Right? So it has to matter for the now. And the third word, I've not got a clever story to tell. But it does strike me that whenever we talk about education, everybody is so serious about it. And I know education is a serious business, I've already said so. The greatest gift we can bestow on our young people. But why does it have to be taken so seriously all the time in our classrooms? Because one of the things I know about education is the greatest classrooms are places filled with laughter and fun and enjoyment and magic. You know, I remember when I was a young teacher going for a job in a school, and the school principal showed me round, and he stood me in a corridor, and he said, "What do you hear?" And I said, "Nothing." And he said, "That is the sound of a great education." I left the building straight away. I did not turn back, and I never went back again. Because if we think about the art of teaching, one of the great skills of the artist teacher is to create an environment which is relaxed, which is enjoyable, where the teacher themselves, no matter how they're feeling that day, can transmit the magic and the passion and the relaxation and the enjoyment. Because we all know, don't we, as teachers, I'm not saying anything new, that when we walk into a room with a group of students and we're relaxed and we're happy and we're smiling and we're laughing, our students will learn at twice the rate they would than if they were in a room where they were too scared to fail. So living, learning and laughing. Maybe you might want to share some of those things with each other later. Which brings me on to this point about failure. Isn't that a beautiful picture? Isn't that a lovely image? Just for 3 or 4 seconds, turn to the person next to you and very quickly say how old you think the person is that drew that picture. Ready? Go. Just 2 or 3 seconds. How old? Okay, thank you. Now my guess is that none of you said over 40. No. Over 30. 20. 10. It's like a game show, this, isn't it? Higher, higher, lower, lower. My guess is most of you said somewhere between the ages of, I don't know, 2 and 5. Yeah. You're looking good. Yes, I said that. Yes, I did. Yes, 2 and 5. Well, you'd be right, but isn't the amazing thing this? Here's a question for you. Because I think kids are stunning, and I'll come back to this hopefully in a little while. One of the things I truly passionately believe is we've got to stop believing we have to teach children how to learn. That's rubbish. Children are born knowing how to learn. If you think about it, many experts now tell us that we learn somewhere between 70 and 75% of everything we learn in our lifetime before we're 5 years of age. Now, I'm not talking about stuff. I'm not talking about knowledge and content. But you think about the complexity of what we learn in the first 5 years of our lives. We learn to walk and talk. We learn to understand vocal intonation, body language. We learn all of these things before we're 5. And of course, if we're born into a multilingual home, we acquire all the languages in that home too. We don't learn one, do we? In a multilingual, and then go, oh right, I'm this age, so now I need to start learning the next language spoken in my home. We learn them at the same time. So we are born the perfect learning machines. So one of the questions is, where does that go? And here's a way to frame the question. Who was the first person who told you that you had to colour in between the lines?
The teacher.
Just think about that for a moment. Because that's the moment at which we stop being natural learners. Because then we're introduced to a world where we're told that education is all about achieving something that somebody else will tell us we have to achieve. And all of a sudden we stop immersing ourselves in learning for the magic of learning, and what happens is the best students are taught how to play a game. A game which is about, tell me why I'm learning, what is it you want me to learn, how will I know when I've learnt it, I'll do that for you. And again, one of the things for me about the magic of great classrooms is they never feel that way. But we have to be very sure as teachers that if we're to protect the art of teaching, even if we are under pressure, and rightly, to be accountable, to achieve something for our students, we don't make our students feel that they're learning what we tell them, when we tell them, how we tell them. Because otherwise what we're actually doing is damaging their ability as learners. If we want our students not just to acquire language, but to immerse themselves in language and to spend a lifetime learning language, we need them to do so because of the magic of what it means to them. I'm learning about my own language every day, every hour of every day. I hear new words and new phrases, and some of them amaze me, and I want to find out about them. And that's what we want. What we want is when our students have left our classrooms, not to believe they've done it because they passed an exam that told them they could speak English, But of course, you know better than I that great language teaching is not about teaching a language. It's about teaching the skills to help people acquire and develop through their lives a love and passion of a language so that they can keep evolving it organically. Otherwise, this is where we end up. Isn't that a beautiful image? I wonder how many of you have seen that before. That's taken from a book called Earth from the Air. Isn't it glorious? Now this is the interesting thing, because this is what happens to most adults. Let me demonstrate. If I asked you to tell me what that picture was, most adults are trained to look for the correct answer. So most adults start to apply logic to that picture to work out what the right answer is. Because what we're taught from the earliest stages of school is that getting things right is the currency of clever. So we look at that and we unpick it. And what most adults do is they go blue, water, brown, land. The green could be algae, could be pollution. Hold on, I think it may be sulfur. I think it may be sulfurous because this looks like the residue of a lava flow. And those look like hot springs. I think this is somewhere volcanic. This is how the logic brain is working. It's how we're trained to think. That looks like a walkway. So this is not a dangerous volcano. This is obviously somewhere that's now safe. And the people on the bridge, and you're not close enough to see, are wearing shorts and t-shirts. So maybe this is a tourist destination. And those people in the room now, who are very, 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 very clever, and think they know the right answer. And I can see who you are, by the way. Because adults are no different to children. You're sat there like this. I know. I know. He doesn't need to tell me. Look, at some of you have gone, it's not me. We do what our students do. Just for those of you that want to know, the correct answer is that's Yellowstone National Park. Look, some of you now go, told you. Some of the others of you who didn't know are looking at that person now going, I'm going to beat you up at playtime. Now here's the really interesting thing. You show that image to a room full of children under the age of 6, and they won't give you the right answer because nobody's trained them to yet. But what they will do is dive into the possibility. And some of what they say is amazing. One of my favourite responses from a group of 5-year-old children is, and don't worry if you can't see it, we don't have to. One of my favourite answers, and it's actually one of the most popular ones, is the face of an evil old wizard. Look, yes, I'm creative. I think like a 5-year-old. Your colleagues are sat there going, yes, you do, we've always known. But then you move it on another level, right? So you say to that room full of adults in groups, and I'm not going to do it now because we haven't got time. In groups, I want you to come up with a story behind the picture, and I'll give you 30 seconds. Most adults go, hello, stupid, I don't want to do this. Have you noticed that teachers often, when we're without our students, behave worse than children? Stupid idea, I'm not going to do it. I want a cup of coffee. Where's my cup of coffee? Same group of 6-year-olds, after 30 seconds, came up with this. And they remembered the thing about the evil wizard, right? So they said this, 30 seconds. There's an evil wizard in the top. Out, you can't see them, they're not in the photograph, but there's an evil wizard up here. And it's the evil wizard is sucking all of the colour out of the earth. And the people on the bridge are brave soldiers. And it's their job to stop the world becoming black and white. How amazing is that? How amazing is that? That's what great learners are. So where does it go? Let me show you another image quickly. For those of you that want to know, that's date drying in the Cairo Basin. My favourite explanation from another group of 6-year-olds, that group of people are building a duvet for a giant. I know, isn't that lovely? So you know, one of the things we have to do is we have to help our students reimagine the currency of clever. Because I'll tell you something, if I've learned nothing else in my career as an educator, I think I've learned this, that you learn nothing new by getting something right. You only ever learn something new from the point of a mistake or the realization that you don't know something or you can't do something. Yet most of education rewards the kids who get everything right. So what happens? As we get older, we start only doing the things we know we can do. Think about our students. Hands tend only to go up in classrooms when the student knows the answer. It's a stultifying thing. You know, when I wrote the book you've got in your bags about change, one of the key factors for me why so many adults find change so hard is because they're scared of making mistakes or getting something wrong. And again, therefore, one of the art forms of great teaching is to make sure that students grow up knowing that the point at which they make a mistake is the point at which the magic begins. And our job is to get them to ask the right questions and to challenge themselves and to have the confidence to do so, so that it's at that moment they can truly learn something new. You know, when I think about my own inability, my paralyzing inability to communicate in Spanish with you today, because I know a few words. I know how to order a beer. I know the important stuff. I do. I can even order dos beers. But I have a paralysing fear which stops me speaking to you in any way, shape or form in Spanish. And that fear is very simple. I'm frightened that if I get something wrong, people will think less of me. And it strikes me that possibly more than any other area of learning, language is one of the most dangerous for a student. Because a lot of what you learn in a classroom you can learn on your own quietly, sat at your desk, writing stuff down. It's quite a private process. Learning a language just isn't, is it, by its very nature? And it requires us to be prepared to say and to speak and to communicate. So again, it would strike me one of the arts of the great teacher, particularly one of the great teachers of English, is how do we create the environments where our students are prepared to shout it from the rooftops? Because actually it's about that moment when they get it wrong that they're going to be on the journey to do something new. I just want to step away from that for a few minutes, but in a way underline what I've been saying to you. Where the pressure comes from all of this tends to be driven by organisations like this one. I can see the faces on teachers' faces. It's a bit like talking about the devil, talking about the OECD. Teachers do this when I talk about the OECD. They go... People go, if I have to hear about the OECD one more time, and how lousy Mexico is in the international academic league tables, I'm going to shoot you. And you'd be right. The problem actually, by the way, I don't believe are the reports themselves. The problem is the way the reports are manipulated by the media and politicians. The challenge for all of us is not very many people actually read the reports published by the OECD. Because when you do, they have some very interesting things to say. And they have a lot of very interesting things to say about the art of teaching. and particularly the challenge of teaching in the 21st century. Now, a month before the last PISA league tables were published, the OECD produced an enormously powerful document called the Skills Outlook. It was the first time they've ever published a global report into the links between skills, employability, and education. If you get the chance and you have time on your hands, rather than drink the bottle of wine, read the report. Don't, actually. Let me tell you about it. Now, this report was a fascinating report. And there were 4 headlines that I want to share with you from the summary, the executive summary of this report, that I think are extremely powerful. Let me share them with you. The first, that the countries where young people are struggling the most to find work in the current climate are countries that have become overly obsessed with teaching to qualifications rather than teaching actual skills. Now, there's a danger here, because the PISA report forces politicians into the belief that what we need to do is focus solely on qualifications. The danger is, if that's what we do, we are limiting our students' potential. And the OECD report says so. So when we're teaching language, we've got to focus not on making sure we prepare our children to take exams, but that we're genuinely teaching them the skills of language acquisition. That's vital. Second, and this is really interesting, they surveyed thousands of the world's most powerful companies and employers. And what they found was something I guess we've all known for a while. That when we were in the midst of the Industrial Revolution, the premium skill you could bring to a job were routine cognitive skills. The ability to learn something and to reproduce it. The ability to work in a factory with intense concentration and repeat complex technical tasks over and over and over and over again. What these companies are now saying is that is almost irrelevant to most of them and most of the way they do business. By far, the most important skills characteristics employers are looking for, and increasingly so when you look at the graphic, are interpersonal skills, beyond anything. Well, that again underlines for me what's already been said this morning by the ambassador. Interpersonal skills are everything, and therefore language is at the very heart of that, isn't it? Absolutely at the heart. If you can't communicate with somebody, your interpersonal skills are really limited. Unless you're British, of course. Because we just have to shout louder at people. I want a beer, please. It works. We're fine, the Brits. Okay. We can ignore this. If you're British, ignore this. It's fine. This is an interesting one too. That employers are simply not interested anymore in people who do what they're told. When they're screening and looking for to employ young people, the formal qualifications have almost become secondary. At the heart of what they want in new employers are the ability to continuously learn, to adapt, and to change. Do you know, it's fascinating. Organisations like PricewaterhouseCoopers, who are the biggest graduate employers on earth, do you know the first thing they do with their graduate employees? They send them to Orlando, to Disney World for 2 weeks to study at the Disney Institute to learn about creativity, innovation, how to adapt and how to change. Now that costs PwC millions of dollars a year. PwC wouldn't do it for fun. They do it because it makes hard-nosed business sense. So we have to make sure in every way when we're teaching our students, we make sure that underlying the language learning and the teaching of English, we are making sure that they are developing the skills to learn, adapt and change. And then the final one fascinates me too. We need to build much, much closer links between the world of education and the world of business. And part of that, by the way, requires us as educators and teachers to make sure that we don't just live inside of classrooms. That we, when we can, spend time in the outside world, seeing how language is evolving and is being used in the worlds of business, in the charitable organisations, in social entrepreneurial organisations. We, as teachers, must be committed to being learners. And what that means is if we want our students to step out of their comfort zones, then we have to step out of ours. And I'm running out of time, so if it's okay, I'm going to finish with one last story for you. And it's based on the experience I had meeting another remarkable human being. So a little while ago, I was giving a speech in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia. And the other keynote speaker was a man who's changed the world. Now, I have to say, I'm very privileged in that I get to meet many remarkable people. But I've never met anyone face to face who I can genuinely say has changed the world, but this man had. So I met him briefly at the event. We had maybe 5 minutes talking to each other between our speeches. But imagine my excitement when I found myself sat next to him on the plane from Riyadh to London. I was like a kid. I was like, oh my God! He was like, oh my God. When we arrived in London, you've never seen anyone run off a plane so fast in all your life. The man's name was Steve Wozniak, the co-founder of Apple Computers. He and Jobs, just think about that. I got 7 hours with Steve Wozniak on a plane. He'll never forget them either. And we talked a lot. And we talked about education, because he had some interesting things to say. I was talking about this at dinner last night. One of the things that I love about Steve Wozniak is he's so down to earth. You would never know. And the amazing thing was that when we were walking through airports together, people just didn't know. He could have been anybody. And he's got no kind of, he's not, I'm famous and I'm rich. He's not interested in all of that. And he talked very honestly to me. He said, when I was a little boy, 8 or 9 years of age, he said, I was socially inept. I was one of those children that found it impossible to make friends with other kids. I was the child who would be sat at the back of the classroom, wishing I knew how to make friends with other children. He said, while I was sat there, he said, I didn't genuinely, Richard, I look back now and I think, I can't believe I've been told that I've changed the world. He said, I didn't think that as an 8-year-old, but he said, I do remember as a child thinking to myself, when I grow up, I want to make the world better for people like me. And he said, as a child, he said, I had 2 ambitions to help me do that. One, he said, was to be an engineer. He said, because my dad was an engineer, and engineers change the world. He said the other, and this was the moment I fell in love with him. He said the other was to be a teacher. I know. When you meet him, hug him. It's all right, he doesn't have security, they won't arrest you. That's why he was so scared. I hugged him on the plane. He's like, get off me! He said, anyway, it won't surprise you to know that as I grew older, I chose engineering. He said, to be honest with you, it was because there was more money in it. He's not wrong. But he said, when I left Apple, he said, I was in a very privileged position. He said, I never needed to work another day in my life to earn money. He said, so I decided it was time to fulfill my second ambition. So he said, what the world doesn't know is that for the next 7 years, I worked as a technology teacher in my local state school, working with 7th grade students. I know. Imagine that. boys and girls, your new technology teacher, the co-founder of Apple Computers, Steve Wozniak. So he has some very interesting insights, and let me share two with you as we come to the end. So I said, what have you learned about education then, Steve, through all of that experience and spending time as a teacher? He said, I'll tell you the first thing. And he was very sure about this. He said, you know, what I've learnt is that what you teach is really not that important. But how you learn is vital. That's the art of great teaching. Anybody can give somebody else information, but can we truly transform our young people's lives so that they become lifelong learners? Great point, I thought. So I said, well, tell me a little bit more about that. He said, well, you know, when Steve and I set up Apple, we had no idea what we were doing. He said, Steve was full of confidence. He'd go to these big companies in the valley and promise them stuff. He'd lie, actually, he said. He'd tell them we had products we didn't have. And then he'd take hundreds of thousands of dollars from them, come back to the garage we were working in, and go, Steve, I've just got $100,000. And I'd say to him, for what? And he'd say, for this. And Steve Wozniak would turn around to Jobs and go, but we haven't got that. And Jobs would go, but don't worry, Steve, you've got 72 hours to invent it. But he said the thing was that people started throwing money at us really quickly, which meant we were going to have to build a business, a proper business. We were going to have to employ people. And he said, and that was going to be tough. He said, you know, Jobs' genius was he knew that Apple couldn't be a company that made stuff. Because if Apple was a company that made stuff, we'd be dead in 3 years. We had to be a company that invented stuff. So he said that meant we needed a specific kind of person working with us. You know, employing clever people in the valley, that was easy. There were millions of clever people in the valley. Silicon Valley was flooded with some of the most brilliant minds in the world. So we went out one night to talk about this problem over a beer. What were we looking for? He said, and we came up with a little mantra. He said, Jobs loved mantras. So we came up with a mantra for employment. He said, it must have worked because it's a mantra Apple still use today. And he said, it's this. He said, at Apple, we will never employ anybody who needs managing. We will never employ anybody who needs managing. You know what, I think we could tweak that a little, and this is where I'm going to leave you with this thought, this challenge. I wonder, actually, if the greatest art of the greatest teachers is to educate children in a way where they don't need teaching. Thank you very much indeed.